The shack door slammed in the wind like a death rattle. Inside, blood pooled beneath a woman left to rot. Apache abandoned legs, useless as kindling. Jonah Pike stood in that doorway holding a choice: walk away or damn himself to trouble. He chose trouble. What followed wasn't mercy, it was revolution. A wheelchair built by rough hands, a town armed with torches, two scarred souls who turned a lonely ranch into something the frontier had never seen: a home built on consent, not conquest. Stay with me until the end and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. The desert didn't forgive, and it sure as hell didn't forget. Jonah Pike had learned that truth the hard way, watched it carve lines into his face deeper than any plow ever cut earth. 52 years of sun and loss had made him the kind of man who moved through the world like a shadow, present necessary but never asking for light. His ranch sat 3 hours south of Dusty Ford, tucked against red rock formations that glowed like coals at sunset. Most days, the only voices he heard were his own and the wind's, and that suited him fine. But this morning, the wind carried something else. He'd been checking fence lines along the eastern pasture when he saw it. A shack he'd passed 100 times before, door hanging crooked on leather hinges, banging against the frame in a rhythm that made his gut tighten. Jonah pulled his horse to a stop, squinting through the heat shimmer. Something about that sound felt wrong, felt urgent. "Easy, girl," he murmured, dismounting. His boots hit dust that hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks. The stench hit him 3 feet from the door. Blood and waste and something else, desperation maybe, if desperation had a smell. Jonah's hand moved to his belt, fingers brushing the knife handle out of instinct. He'd found dead men before, found dead cattle, found rattlesnakes coiled in grain sacks. The frontier taught you to expect the worst. He wasn't expecting her. She slumped against the far wall, wrists bound with leather cord, strung through an iron ring bolted to rotting wood. The ropes had cut deep. Her hands were purple, swollen past recognition, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They were open, fixed on him with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging every detail of his face, deciding in real time whether he was salvation or just another variation of hell. Apache, he realized. The bone structure, the way her black hair fell, despite the filth matting it, and her legs bent at angles that spoke of old injury, of muscles that had forgotten their purpose. "Jesus?" Jonah breathed. She didn't flinch at the word, didn't blink, just watched him with those eyes that had already seen too much and somehow still demanded more from the world. He crossed the space in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside her. Up close, he could see the shallow rise of her chest, breathing but barely. Dried blood crusted the corner of her mouth. Her dress, what remained of it, was torn and stained beyond recognition of its original color. Who did this? The question came out rougher than he intended. She didn't answer, maybe couldn't. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound emerged except a faint rattle from deep in her chest. Jonah pulled his knife and cut the bindings in 2 swift motions. Her arms dropped like dead weight, and he caught them, gently lowering them to her lap. The flesh beneath the cord was raw, weeping. He'd seen rope burns on cattle that looked better. "Can you hear me?" He leaned closer, searching her face for recognition, for anything. "I need to know if you want help, if you still want to—" He stopped, the words catching. "If you still want to live." For a long moment, nothing. The wind howled outside, throwing dust against the shack walls, like it was trying to bury the whole scene, hide the evidence of whatever cruelty had happened here. Then slowly, deliberately, she blinked. Once, twice. It was enough. Jonah slid his arms beneath her, careful of the legs that clearly couldn't bear weight. She was lighter than he expected, all sharp angles and dehydration. As he lifted her, her hand shot out with surprising strength, fingers closing around a strip of leather that dangled from her neck, some kind of talisman or marker. She clutched it against her chest like it contained her last piece of identity. "I've got you," he said quietly. "You're not dying in this place. The ride back to his ranch stretched into eternity. Jonah had tied his horse to a slow walk every jostle, making him wince in sympathy for the woman cradled in his arms. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her breathing shallow but steady enough to give him hope. Twice she gripped that leather strip so hard her knuckles went white, like she was anchoring herself to the world through sheer force of will. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. Sweat soaked through Jonah's shirt, plastered his hat to his head. He didn't care. He just kept moving, kept talking to her in low tones. Nonsense, mostly observations about the landscape, promises that the ranch wasn't far, that there was water and shelter and a bed that didn't come with ropes attached. "Got a nice porch," he found himself saying as they crested the final ridge. "Catches the evening breeze real good. You can watch the sunset without moving an inch. Painted it last spring white, keeps the heat down some." She stirred at his voice, eyes fluttering open. They fixed on the horizon, on the cluster of buildings coming into view. The main house, low and sturdy. The barn with its weathered red paint. Corrals that held ghosts of cattle, long since sold off to pay debts he could barely remember. Home, such as it was. He carried her straight inside, kicking the doors shut behind them with his boot. The interior was neat in that particular way, of men who lived alone, everything in its place because there was no one to disrupt the order, no laughter to scatter books, no small hands to leave toys scattered like seeds. The loneliness of the space seemed to multiply with her presence, throwing into sharp relief just how empty the house had become. Jonah laid her on his bed, the only bed, with a gentleness that surprised even himself. She immediately tried to sit up, panic flashing across her features. "Easy," he said, palms out in a gesture of peace. "You're safe here. No ropes, no chains, just rest." She searched his face, still cataloging, still deciding. Then slowly she eased back against the pillow. Her hand never released the leather strip. Jonah moved to the stove, building a fire with practiced efficiency. He had soup from 2 days ago, thin stuff, mostly broth, and a few vegetables going soft. But it was warm, and it was something. While it heated, he filled a basin with water from the well, added a splash from the kettle to take the chill off. When he returned to the bedside with both, she was watching him, always watching. "Going to clean those wounds," he explained, setting the basin down. "Then you'll eat. Not much, but enough." He expected resistance, maybe fear. Instead, she gave a single nod. The process was slow, careful. He washed the blood and grime from her face, first revealing features that were striking even through the damage. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that tilted slightly at the corners. Her skin was sun-darkened but carried an undertone of warmth, like clay waiting for the kiln. Every time the cloth passed over a particularly tender spot, she'd tense but never pull away, never cry out. "You're tougher than most men I know," Jonah murmured, wringing out the cloth. Her lips moved. He leaned closer. "Had to be," she whispered. The words were rough, underused, but clear enough. It was the first time she'd spoken. Jonah felt something shift in his chest, recognition of strength maybe, or the first fragile thread of connection. "Yeah," he agreed softly. "I imagine you did." He cleaned her wrists, next applying salve he normally reserved for wounded animals. She hissed once when he worked the medicine into the deepest cuts, but her eyes never left his face, studying, always studying. The soup came next. He helped her sit up, propped against pillows he'd grabbed from the cedar chest, pillows that still smelled faintly of lavender from another life. She took the spoon in trembling hands, lifted it to her lips. The first sip seemed to take all her concentration. The second came easier. "Slow," Jonah cautioned. "Your stomach needs to remember how this works." She paused, met his gaze, and something happened. The corner of her mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to matter. Then she took another careful sip. He sat in the chair by the bed, watching her eat. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was something else, weighted with unasked questions, with trauma too fresh to name, with the strange intimacy of crisis. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The fire crackled in the stove. Two strangers sharing air and space, and the stubborn insistence on survival. When the bowl was half empty, she set it aside. Her eyelids were drooping. "Sleep," Jonah said. "I'll be right here. You're not dying tonight." Her eyes found his one last time. Then finally she let them close. Jonah kept vigil through the night, dozing in the chair, but never fully sleeping. Every few hours he'd check her breathing, add wood to the fire, adjust the blankets. The lamplight painted everything in shades of amber and shadow. Once near dawn she made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a cry, and he was on his feet instantly, hand on her shoulder. "Easy," he whispered. "Just dreams. You're safe." She settled in hand, loosening slightly on that leather strip, for the first time since he'd found her. Morning came slow and gold. Jonah made coffee, the ritual of it comforting in its familiarity. He was halfway through his first cup when he heard movement from the bedroom. He found her awake, struggling to push herself upright. "Let me help." He started forward. She held up one hand, stopping him. Then, with visible effort and a determination that made his throat tight, she maneuvered herself into a sitting position. Her legs hung useless over the edge of the bed, but her back was straight, her chin lifted. "I need," she began, then stopped, frustration clouding her features. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out," Jonah assured her. She gestured toward the door, toward the privy he knew was out back. Understanding dawned, and with it the reality of her situation. She couldn't walk, couldn't manage the steps, the distance, any of it. The humiliation in her eyes was a physical thing. "I'll help you," he said simply. "No shame in it. Bodies broke, not you." She studied him for a long moment, then gave a tight nod. What followed was awkward, ungainly, and somehow sacred. He carried her out back, gave her privacy, brought her back. She didn't speak, but when he settled her back on the bed, her hand briefly touched his forearm, a gesture so quick he almost missed it. "Thank you," it said. "Or maybe I see you," or possibly both. That afternoon, while she slept again, Jonah stood in his barn, surrounded by wood scraps and tools. An idea taking shape in his mind. He'd built cattle chutes and gates, mended wagon wheels, crafted furniture when money was too tight to buy. His hands knew wood, knew how things fit together. He worked through the day, sawdust coating his arms, sweat stinging his eyes. The design came together piece by piece, a chair, but not just any chair. Something with wheels, something she could move herself. Independence carved from pine and iron. Dusk was painting the sky in bruised purples when he finally wheeled it into the house. She was awake, sitting where he'd left her, that leather strip finally resting on the table beside the bed, instead of clutched to her chest. Progress, he thought. "Made you something," he said, suddenly uncertain. What if she took it as insult, as confirmation of her brokenness? She looked at the wheelchair, then at him, then back at the chair. Her fingers gripped the edge of the bed. "It's rough," he continued, words tumbling out. "But the wheels are good, took them from an old cart. The arms are pine-sanded smooth. You can move it yourself, see, push here, and show me." 2 words, but they carried weight. Command, curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite name. Jonah rolled the chair closer, explained the mechanics. How the wheels turned, how she could propel herself, how he'd made the seat exactly the right height for the table, for the stove, for a life that might include more than just this bed. She reached out, ran her hand along the arm. "Help me," she said. Together they managed the transfer. It took time, required trust, demanded patience from both of them. But when she finally sat in that chair, hands gripping the wheels, something transformed in her face. Not happiness, exactly, the wounds were too fresh for that, but something adjacent to it. Possibility, maybe. Or the memory of freedom. She pushed, tentative at first. The chair rolled forward 6 inches, then a foot. Then she was moving across the room, clumsy but mobile, and when she turned to look at him, there it was, that smile he'd glimpsed before, wider now, undeniable. "I can," she breathed, wonder softening her voice. "Yeah," Jonah said, his own throat tight. "You can." She spent an hour just wheeling around the house, exploring corners she'd only seen from the bed. He watched her map the space, claim it in small increments. When she finally rolled to a stop by the window, she sat there looking out at the fading light, at the desert, stretching endless and cruel and beautiful. "What's your name?" Jonah asked. He was leaning against the door-frame, coffee cup in hand, giving her space but remaining present. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers traced patterns on the wheelchair arms, like she was reading her own story in the grain of the wood. "Taya," she finally said. "It means stands firm." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Even when I can't stand at all." "Seems to me you're standing firmer than most folks I know," Jonah replied. "Name's Jonah, Jonah Pike." "Jonah," she tested the name, rolled it around in her mouth, like the man swallowed by the whale. "You know your Bible." "Mission school, before—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything, the legs, the exile, the shack, all of it. "Before is a hard country," Jonah said quietly. "Yes." She turned the chair to face him. "What were you before Jonah Pike?" The question landed like a stone in still water. He took a long drink of coffee, buying time, deciding how much truth to offer. "Husband," he finally said. "Father. Had a wife named Sarah, girl named Emma. She'd be about 7 now." He paused. "Fever took them both 3 years back. Herd followed not long after, drought, then disease. Been just me and ghosts since." Taya absorbed this, her expression unreadable. "And now I'm a man who found someone in a shack and couldn't leave her there." He met her eyes. "Didn't seem complicated at the time. It will become complicated," she said with certainty. "When the town finds out, when they realize you brought an Apache woman to your home, let them realize it. They'll come for me. They'll have to go through me first." The words hung between them, a promise neither had asked for, but both recognized as binding. Outside, the first stars appeared, pinpricks of light in the gathering dark. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, lonely and persistent. Taya wheeled closer, stopping just in front of him. This close, he could see the fading bruises on her jaw, the way exhaustion still pulled at her features. But he could also see the steel beneath the will that had kept her alive in that shack, that pushed her to master the wheelchair in a single evening, that let her ask hard questions and demand honest answers. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me? Why build this?" She gestured at the chair. Jonah considered lying, offering some noble explanation about duty or Christian charity, but she'd know. Those eyes saw too much. "Because I'm tired of death," he said finally. "Tired of loss. You were alive, barely, but alive. Seemed ashamed to waste that. So I'm your redemption project." It wasn't quite a question. "No." He shook his head. "You're a person who deserved better than dying alone in the dirt. That's all. That's everything." She searched his face, that familiar cataloging happening again. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay, Jonah Pike. I'll stay, but I won't be a burden." "You'll be whatever you need to be," he countered. "Broken hole somewhere between doesn't matter to me. It matters to me. Then we'll figure that out too." Thunder rumbled in the distance, rare for this time of year, but not impossible. Taya turned toward the window, watching clouds build on the horizon. The lamplight caught her profile, painted her in gold and shadow. "Storm coming," she observed. "Yeah." Jonah moved to check the shutters, make sure everything was battened down. "We'll be all right, though. House is solid." "I wasn't talking about the weather." He looked at her, found her still gazing out at the gathering darkness. She was right, of course. The moment Dusty Ford learned about this arrangement, the real storm would begin. But that was tomorrow's trouble. Tonight they had shelter and safety, and the tentative beginning of something that might, against all odds, become trust. "Storm or not," Jonah said, "you're not facing it alone." Taya's hand moved to the leather strip around her neck, but this time when she touched it there was less desperation in the gesture, more memory, less anchor. "My people left me when the dry season came," she said quietly. "Called me burden. Said the tribe couldn't carry dead weight through the hunger months. She laughed hollow and sharp. They weren't too wrong. These legs they broke in a fall 2 winters ago, never healed right. And in the desert, if you can't walk, you can't survive. They're wrong, Jonah said firmly. Dead wrong. Are they? She turned to face him. Look at me. I can't hunt, can't gather, can't even... Her voice cracked slightly. Can't even walk to the privy without help. Jonah pulled up a chair, sat down so they were eye level. You can think, you can plan, you can work with your hands. You survived in that shack longer than most would have. That takes strength of a kind that has nothing to do with legs. He gestured at the wheelchair. And now you've got wheels, so maybe you can't walk, but you sure as hell can move. She stared at him, something shifting behind her eyes. You really believe that? I do. Why? Because I've seen strong men crumble over less. Because you're sitting here having this conversation instead of giving up. Because... He stopped, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. Because I need to believe it. Need to believe that broken doesn't mean finished. The confession hung between them, raw and unintended. Jonah looked away, first suddenly fascinated by the pattern of knots in the floorboards. We're both ghosts, Taya said finally. You of the family you lost. Me of the woman who could run. Maybe. Jonah stood, moved to the window. The storm was closer now, lightning illuminating the clouds from within. Or maybe we're just people trying to figure out how to be alive in a world that keeps demanding we be something else. She wheeled up beside him, and together they watched the storm approach. When the first fat drops of rain hit the dust, sending up that distinctive petrichor scent, Taya closed her eyes and breathed deep. I'd forgotten that smell, she murmured out. Yeah. In the shack, everything smelled like death, like I was already rotting. She opened her eyes. This smells like living. The storm broke fully, then rain sheeting down, turning the yard to mud, drumming on the roof like 1,000 fingers. Inside the cabin glowed warm and dry, a pocket of safety in the deluge. Jonah lit another lamp, made a fresh pot of coffee. Taya wheeled herself to the table, ran her hands across the scarred wood surface like she was reading Braille. What do you need from me? She asked abruptly. While I'm here, what's the price? Jonah poured 2 cups, slid one across to her. Price. No one helps for free. Everyone wants something. I want you to live, he said simply. That's all. No terms, no obligations. You want to leave when you're stronger, you leave. You want to stay, you stay. But while you're here, you don't owe me anything except to keep breathing. She took the cup, held it between both hands, like she was warming herself on it. That's not how the world works. It's how this house works. Jonah sat across from her. I've had enough of taking, of owing, of keeping ledgers. Lost my whole family to fever because I couldn't pay for a doctor fast enough. Lost the herd because the debt collectors wouldn't wait. I'm done with transactions. So what is this? This is 2 people who got dealt bad hands trying to make it through another day. That's all. That's enough. Taya sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim. You're either the best man I've ever met or the worst kind of fool. Probably both, Jonah admitted with a half smile. She surprised him by laughing, a real laugh, short but genuine. Probably. They sat like that for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the rain. The storm was settling into a steady rhythm, now no longer violent but persistent. Jonah found himself watching Taya's hands on the cup, the capable way she held it, despite the lingering tremor from days of dehydration. There was grace in those movements, a kind of efficiency that spoke of competence waiting to be reclaimed. Tomorrow, she said, breaking the comfortable silence, I want to work. You need to rest. I've been resting for months. Fire entered her voice. In that shack, I could do nothing. Now I have this. She patted the wheelchair arms. I have hands. I have a mind. I need to use them, or I'll go mad. Jonah recognized that tone. It was the same one he'd used when Sarah tried to keep him inside during his own dark days, when grief threatened to swallow him whole. Work was salvation. Purpose was breath. All right, he agreed, but we start slow. Stack some wood, maybe. Sort the tools in the barn. Whatever needs doing. Deal. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, followed by a crack of thunder that rattled the windows. Taya didn't flinch, just watched the storm with an expression of fierce satisfaction, like she was glad to see the world still had violence in it, still had power. "Thank you," she said quietly, still watching the window. "For what?" "For asking if I wanted to live. For giving me a choice." She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, or might have been fury, or might have been both. "In that shack, I'd already decided to die. Then you walked in and asked me to choose again. That's a gift I don't have words for." Jonah's throat tightened. "You chose well. We'll see." She wheeled back from the table, but either way, it was mine to choose. That matters. She was right. In a world that had stripped her of so much mobility, community dignity, the power to choose her own death or survival was perhaps the only thing she'd had left. And he'd honored that. Hadn't assumed, hadn't taken control, just asked. The rain continued through the night. Jonah made up a bedroll on the floor, insisting Taya keep the bed. She'd argued, but not hard. Exhaustion was still pulling at her body, demanding the rest it had been denied for too long. He listened to her breathing, even outwatched the lamplight paint shifting shadows on the walls, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Not that it mattered, the choice was made. She was here, and he'd protect her from whatever came next. Town gossip, old prejudices, violence dressed up as righteousness. He'd failed to protect Sarah and Emma. Maybe this was his chance to get it right, or maybe Taya was right and he was just a fool. Either way, come morning, they'd face it together. The storm broke near dawn, leaving the world washed clean and strangely quiet. Jonah woke to the smell of coffee. She'd figured out the stove, wheeled herself around his kitchen like she'd been doing it for years. She'd even found the eggs, somehow managed to fry them one-handed while balancing in the chair. "Morning," she said, not looking up from the pan. "You're supposed to be resting." "I rested. Now I'm useful." She slid 2 eggs onto a plate, pushed it across the counter toward him. "Eat." He ate. They were good eggs, better than his usual, actually. She'd found the wild onions he kept in the cold box, chopped them fine. Small things, but they mattered. After breakfast, true to her word, Taya wheeled herself out to the barn. The yard was a mess of mud and puddles, and Jonah had to lay down boards for her to roll across, but she made it. Inside, she surveyed the chaotic landscape of tools and salvage with a critical eye. "This is a disaster," she pronounced. "It's organized. It's chaos pretending to be organized." She picked up a rusted saw, tested the teeth with her thumb. "This whole wall should be saws and blades. That corner, hammers and mallets. You've got nails scattered in 4 different boxes. I know where everything is. You know where everything was last time you saw it." She wheeled to the workbench. "This is inefficient. Waste time when time matters." Jonah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, fighting a smile. "Yes, ma'am." She shot him a look. "Don't patronize me. Wouldn't dream of it." They worked through the morning, her directing from the chair, him doing the heavy lifting. She had a mind for order, for systems. Within 2 hours, the barn was transformed, tools sorted by type and size, nails, consolidated a workspace that actually made sense. Her hands never stopped moving, even when she was thinking. Competence radiated from her like heat. "Better," she finally declared, surveying their work. "Much," Jonah agreed. And it was. But more than that, he'd watched her come alive during the work, watched purpose smooth some of the harder edges from her face. They were heading back to the house when they heard it hoofbeats on the road. Jonah tensed, hand instinctively moving to his hip. A single rider crested the rise, and even at a distance, Jonah recognized the posture. Miller, one of the hands from the Jacobson, spread to the east. "Inside," Jonah said quietly. "No." Taya's voice was steel. I won't hide. Taya, I said no. She wheeled herself to face the approaching rider, chin lifted. Let them see. Miller pulled up about 20 feet away, taking in the scene. His eyes went from Jonah to Taya and back again, something ugly shifting in his expression. Pike, he said, not dismounting. Didn't know you were taking in strays. Didn't know I needed your approval, Jonah replied evenly. Miller spat into the mud. That's an Apache woman. That's a person. Her name's Taya. Don't care what its name is. Miller's hand rested on his saddle horn, casual but ready. Folks in town won't like this. Apache killed plenty of good people, and good people killed plenty of Apache, Taya said, her voice carrying clearly. Should we compare tallies, or will you finish your business and leave? Miller's face reddened. You got a mouth on you, girl. I have many things. A mouth is just one of them. She wheeled forward slightly, and Jonah's heart hammered. You have a message for Mr. Pike, or did you ride 3 hours just to state the obvious? For a moment, Jonah thought Miller might do something stupid. The man's hand twitched toward his belt, and Jonah shifted his weight ready, but then Miller seemed to remember himself, or maybe just remember that Jonah had a reputation with a rifle. No message, Miller finally said. Just passing through, wanted to warn you, Pike. This won't sit well at all. Noted, Jonah said flatly. Miller wheeled his horse, paused. Hale's calling a town meeting next Sunday. Bet your situation comes up. He can bring it up all he wants. Your funeral. Miller kicked his horse into a trot, disappearing back over the rise. Silence settled like dust. Taya sat rigid in her chair, knuckles white on the wheels. You shouldn't have confronted him, Jonah said quietly. I shouldn't cower either. She turned to look at him, fire in her eyes. You said I could choose. I choose to stand. Even in this chair, I choose to stand. And looking at her jaw, set eyes blazing every inch of her radiating defiance, Jonah couldn't argue. Wouldn't argue. All right, he said. Then we stand together. Together, she echoed, and wheeled herself toward the house, leaving Jonah to follow in her wake, wondering what the hell he'd started, and knowing deep in his bones that there was no going back now. The die was cast. The town would come. And when they did, they'd find two people who'd decided that dignity was worth fighting for, even if it cost them everything. The days that followed Miller's visit carried a weight that pressed down like storm clouds, refusing to break. Jonah found himself checking the horizon more often, hand straying to his rifle even during mundane tasks. But Taya moved through the ranch like she was staking claim to every inch of it, wheelchair tracks crisscrossing the yard like signatures. She was up before dawn that third morning, already working, when Jonah emerged from his bedroll. She'd found his whetstone and was sharpening kitchen knives with long practiced strokes, testing each blade against her thumb with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. You keep moving like this, you'll burn out, Jonah observed, pouring coffee. I've been still for 2 years. The blade sang against the stone. I'm done being still. He watched her work, the economical movements, the focus that narrowed her world to steel and stone. There was meditation in it, he realized, or maybe exorcism. Taya, he started, then stopped, unsure how to frame what he needed to say. She looked up, one eyebrow raised. If you're about to tell me to slow down, or rest, or I need to know what you want from this. The words came out more blunt than he intended. From being here, from whatever this is. The whetstone went still. She set the knife down, carefully wiped her hands on a cloth. What do you think I want? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. She wheeled to the window, looked out at the dawn-painted desert. When she spoke, her voice was quieter, stripped of its usual armor. I want to wake up and not wonder if today's the day I stop mattering. I want to use my hands for something besides holding on to life by a thread. She stopped, fingers gripping the windowsill. I want to feel like a person again instead of a problem waiting to be solved. Jonah moved to stand beside her, careful to leave space between them. You are a person. Problem doesn't enter into it, doesn't it? She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her eyes was almost harder to witness than the defiance. You carried me out of that shack. You built me a chair. You feed me, shelter me. How is that not you solving my problem? Because I'm not trying to fix you, Jonah said firmly. I'm just trying to give you room to be whoever you need to be. Fixed, broken, somewhere in between, that's your business, not mine. And what do you get out of it? The question hung there sharp as the blades she'd been sharpening. Jonah thought about lying, about offering some noble platitude, but she'd see through it. Those eyes saw everything. Someone to talk to, he admitted. Someone who understands that life breaks you and you keep going anyway. Someone who... He stopped, surprised by the truth of it. Someone who makes this place feel less like a tomb. Taya studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, something in her expression softened. Not much, she was too wounded for easy softness, but enough. Okay, she said simply. Okay. I'll stay. I'll work. I'll be whatever version of myself I can manage. She wheeled closer. But I won't be your redemption, Jonah Pike, and I won't be your charity case. I'm here because I choose to be. Because maybe you're right. Maybe we can both be alive in whatever way we know how. That's all I'm asking. Good. She picked up the knife again, tested the edge. Now let me finish these. Dull blades are dangerous. They fell into a rhythm after that, each finding their place in the machinery of survival. Taya took over the kitchen, entirely discovering a talent for making something. From nothing, dried beans became stew rich enough to stick to ribs. Hard biscuits transformed under her hands into something almost tender. She organized the pantry with the same ruthless efficiency she'd brought to the barn, creating order from chaos. Jonah handled the heavy work, mending fences, checking the few cattle he had left, maintaining the property. But increasingly he found himself consulting Taya on decisions. Where to plant the kitchen garden, how to redirect the rain barrel runoff, whether to sell the old plow or try to repair it. She had opinions on everything, delivered with a directness that might have seemed harsh if it weren't so clearly rooted in competence. And she was right more often than not, seeing solutions his grief-dulled mind had missed. By the end of the first week, the ranch looked different, felt different. There was life in it again, purpose. The kind of energy that comes when two people stop just surviving and start actually living. But the world outside their fence line hadn't forgotten them. Sunday came with clear skies and the distant sound of church bells from Dusty Ford, a sound that carried farther than it should, like the wind wanted to make sure they heard it. Jonah was checking the water trough when Taya wheeled out dressed in a clean shirt he'd found in Sarah's old trunk. It fit her well enough, and she'd braided her hair, the leather strip now woven into the plait. You look nice, Jonah said. I look presentable. She squinted toward town. They're having their meeting. Yeah. Miller said my situation would come up. Probably will. She was quiet for a moment, fingers drumming on the wheelchair arms. What will you do if they come here? If they demand I leave? Jonah straightened, met her eyes. They can demand all they want. You're not leaving unless you choose to. They might not give you a choice. Then they'll learn something about how hard I can be when pushed. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You're a stubborn man, Jonah Pike. Takes one to know one. Taya stands firm. They worked through the morning, but the tension was there, humming beneath every action. Around noon, Jonah spotted dust on the horizon riders, multiple moving with purpose. His gut tightened. Inside, he said. No. Taya wheeled to face the approaching group. We've had this conversation. At least get the rifle. I have a blade. She patted her lap, where Jonah now saw one of the knives she'd sharpened hidden in the folds of her skirt. And I have you. That's enough. It wasn't enough. It was nowhere near enough against what was coming. But Jonah recognized the set of her jaw, the steel in her spine. She'd stand her ground chairbound or not. and he'd be damned before he let her stand alone. The riders resolved into 5 men, Hale in the lead, his bulk unmistakable even at a distance. Behind him, Miller and 3 others Jonah recognized from town. They pulled up at the property line, Hale's horse dancing nervously, as if it could sense its rider's agitation. "Pike," Hale called out, not dismounting. His voice carried the weight of authority he thought he possessed. "We need to talk." "So talk," Jonah replied, positioning himself slightly in front of Taya's chair. Hale's eyes flicked to Taya, something ugly crossing his face. "Not with that here. Her name is Taya, and she stays. That's the problem, Pike." Hale leaned forward in his saddle. "The council met this morning. Unanimous decision, no Apache on these lands. It's not safe, not right, and not happening." Taya's hand tightened on her knife, but her voice came out steady, almost bored. "I'm one woman in a chair. Exactly how much danger do you imagine I pose? It's not about you specifically," one of the other men spoke up, Harrison, who ran the general store. "It's about what you represent. Apache killed settlers, burned homes. We lost people to your kind." "And you lost none to me," Taya shot back. "I've killed no one, burned nothing. I'm guilty of existing, while Apache, which apparently is crime enough." "It's not personal," Harrison started. "It's entirely personal," Jonah interrupted. "You rode 3 hours to my property to tell a woman in a wheelchair that she doesn't deserve shelter. That's about as personal as it gets." Hale's face reddened. The law says I can have guests on my own land," Jonah countered. "She's my guest. End of discussion. She's more than a guest, and you know it." Miller had found his courage again, emboldened by numbers. "Word is you're treating her like family, like she belongs here." "She does belong here." The words landed like stones in still water rippling outward. Even Taya turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her features. "You're making a mistake, Pike." Hale's voice dropped to something almost sympathetic. "A big one. The town won't accept this. They'll make life hard for you. No credit at the store, no help with Roundup, no—" "I've managed alone before," Jonah said flatly. "I'll manage again." "What about her?" Harrison gestured at Taya. "What happens when someone decides to take matters into their own hands? When you're out checking fences and she's here alone?" It was a threat dressed as concern, and everyone knew it. Jonah's hand moved to his hip, instinct overriding reason. "Anyone who touches her answers to me," he said quietly, "and I promise you that's an answer they won't survive." Taya wheeled forward, and Jonah wanted to stop her but knew better than to try. She rolled right up to Hale's horse, craned her neck to look the big man in the eye. "You come to my home, and yes, it is my home with threats and ultimatums," she said, voice sharp as winter wind. "You speak of danger while 5 armed men surround one woman who cannot walk. You call yourselves civilized, but civilization is just a word you use to justify cruelty." She leaned back, crossed her arms. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. And if you come back, you'd better bring more men, because 2 of you aren't walking away." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Hale stared down at Taya, and for a moment Jonah thought the man might actually dismount, might actually make this a fight. His hand inched toward his rifle, but then Hale laughed, harsh, bitter. "You've got fire, girl, I'll give you that." He turned his attention back to Jonah. "But fire burns out, and when it does, when this little arrangement falls apart, don't come crying to the town for help." "Wouldn't dream of it," Jonah replied. Hale yanked his reins horse, pivoting. "You've got until next Sunday. After that, the council takes official action. Could be a fine, could be worse." He paused. "Think hard about what you're protecting, Pike. Think hard about whether it's worth losing everything." They rode off, dust rising in their wake like a departing plague. Jonah and Taya sat in silence until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Taya's shoulders sag, slightly tension releasing in increments. That was stupid, Jonah said quietly. Which part? The part where you threatened 5 armed men. She looked up at him and there was fire in her eyes. But something else too, fear, carefully controlled but present. Was I supposed to cower to prove them right by showing weakness? You were supposed to stay alive. I've been just staying alive for 2 years. She wheeled toward the house. I'm tired of it. Tired of being small and quiet and hoping predators pass me by. If they're going to come for me anyway, I'll meet them on my feet, metaphorically speaking. Jonah caught up to her, put a hand on the chair to stop her progress. Taya, listen to me. This isn't about pride or proving points. These men, they're scared, and scared men do terrible things. I know. She turned to face him fully. I know exactly what scared men do. I've got the scars to prove it. Her hand moved to her legs, then away. But I also know that the moment I start hiding, start apologizing for existing, I've already lost. So if we're going to fight, and we are going to fight, then I'd rather do it standing my ground than curled up hoping for mercy that won't come. She was right. God help him, she was right. Mercy from men like Hale was a myth, a story they told themselves to sleep better. The only real safety came from being too costly to attack, too dangerous to corner. All right, Jonah said. Then we prepare. For what? For whatever comes next Sunday, or before. He headed toward the barn. I've got extra ammunition stored. We'll need to secure the windows, maybe set up positions. Jonah, her voice stopped him. Are you really willing to go to war over this? Over me? He turned, found her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Fear and hope and disbelief all mixed together. I've already been to war, he said simply. Against grief, against drought, against a world that kept taking. This time I'm fighting for something instead of against. That's a war worth having. Something shifted in her face. Walls coming down just a fraction, just enough. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Told you before, probably both. This time her laugh was real warm. Definitely both. They spent the afternoon preparing. Jonah pulled his extra rifles from the locked chest, cleaned them, counted ammunition. Not enough for a siege, but enough for a good showing. Taya sharpened every blade in the house until they could split hairs, then moved on to identifying firing positions, places where the wheelchair could maneuver, where she'd have cover and clear sight lines. You've thought about this before, Jonah observed, watching her map out fields of fire with ruthless efficiency. When you can't run, you learn to defend ground. She marked a spot by the window with a chalk line. My father taught me before the fall, said a warrior fights on their terms or doesn't fight at all. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Past tense, heavy with loss. He died trying to protect me during the fall, fell with me, actually pushed me out of the way of a rock slide, took the worst of it himself. She stared at the chalk mark, seeing something else. Legs were already weakening from some sickness the medicine man couldn't name. The fall just finished what was started. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choice, same as I'm making mine now. She wheeled to another window. We all choose how we face the end. He chose protecting his daughter. I choose standing with someone who sees me as human. The words hit Jonah harder than he expected, settling somewhere in his chest with uncomfortable weight. He'd thought he was just doing the decent thing, the bare minimum of humanity. But to her, it was everything, the difference between dying in a shack and living in a home, between being a burden and being a person. Night fell and they ate dinner in relative silence, both processing what the day had brought. After Jonah found Taya on the porch, watching stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. Can I ask you something? He said, settling into the chair beside her. You're going to anyway. Fair point. That leather strip you wear, what is it? Her hand moved to it automatically, fingers tracing the worn surface. Exile marker. When the tribe left me, the elder tied it around my neck, said it would tell any Apache who found me that I'd been judged unworthy of the people's resources. She laughed, bitter. meant to ensure I'd be abandoned twice, once by deed, once by any who might show mercy. You should burn it. No. She gripped it tighter. It's a reminder of what I survived, of what I overcame. Every time I touch it, I remember that I chose life despite them, despite everything telling me to give up. She looked at him. Some scars are worth keeping. Jonah understood that. He still had Sarah's hair ribbons in the drawer, Emma's small boots on the shelf, not because he wanted to stay in pain, but because forgetting felt like betrayal. Memory was complicated hurt and healing all tangled together. Do you ever wonder if it's worth it? Taya asked quietly. All this fighting, all this struggle. Do you wonder if we should just let go? Every day, Jonah admitted. But then I wake up and there's work to do, cattle to feed, fences to mend, now someone to cook breakfast for. He glanced at her. Purpose doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be enough to get you to tomorrow. And if tomorrow brings Hale and his men, then tomorrow brings a fight, but we'll face it together. She nodded slowly, gaze returning to the stars. Together. That's a strange word for someone who's been alone so long. Strange doesn't mean wrong. No, she agreed. No, it doesn't. They sat until the cold drove them inside, until Jonah banked the fire, and Taya positioned herself in the bed he'd finally convinced her to keep. He took his bedroll by the door, strategic now, not just polite. First line of defense if anyone came through in the night. But the night passed quiet, and morning brought unexpected grace in the form of new life. One of Jonah's 3 remaining cows had calved overnight, a strong bull calf already on its feet and nursing. Look at that, Taya breathed, watching from the fence. New beginning. Literally, Jonah agreed. He was elbow deep in checking the mother over, making sure everything had gone well. This one might actually make it. What will you call him? Jonah considered. Haven't named cattle in years. Seemed pointless when I'd just have to sell them. So name this one. Make it mean something. He looked at the calf, wobbly legs, stubborn eyes, determination, written in every line of its body. Chance, he decided. I'll call him Chance. Taya smiled, real and unguarded. Chance, I like it. They spent the morning with the new calf, making sure he was strong, that the mother was producing enough milk. Simple work, but it carried weight. Hope, maybe in the form of hooves and a tail. Around midday, Taya announced she was making bread. Real bread, Jonah asked, surprised. As real as I can manage with what we have. She was already wheeling toward the house. Figured if we're going to have a war, we might as well have decent food first. Jonah followed her in, watched as she mixed flour and water with hands that knew exactly what they were doing. She'd found yeast somewhere in his poorly organized pantry, was coaxing it back to life with warmth and sugar. Where'd you learn to bake? He asked. Mission school mostly. The nuns taught us figured useful skills might make us more palatable to white society. She kneaded the dough with more force than strictly necessary. Jokes on them. Didn't matter how well I could cook or sew. Still Apache. Still unacceptable. Their loss. The world's full of losses. She shaped the dough into a round, set it to rise. Question is what we do with them. Let them define us or build something new from the pieces. And what are you building? She looked at him, flour dusting her hands, fire in her eyes. A life, a real one, where I matter for more than what I can't do. The bread rose through the afternoon, filling the house with yeast-rich promise. Taya baked it in the Dutch oven Jonah had forgotten he owned, and when she pulled it out golden and perfect, he felt something in his chest shift. This was a home, not just a house, not just shelter, but a place where bread was baked, and cattle were named, and 2 damaged people found ways to be whole. They ate the bread warm, slathered with the last of the butter Jonah had been hoarding. It was perfect, crusty outside, soft within, tasting like comfort and permanence. This is good, Jonah said around a mouthful. It's bread. But she was smiling, pleased despite the dismissive words. It's more than bread." She knew what he meant. It was promise. It was home. It was everything they were fighting for, compressed into flour and water and heat. Evening brought clouds again, another storm building. Jonah checked the animals, secured the barn, made sure everything was battened down. When he returned to the house, Taya was at the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "They'll come soon," she said without preamble. "Hale and his men. Maybe not next Sunday, maybe before." "I know. And when they do, there's a chance we don't win, a chance this ends badly." "Yeah." Jonah moved to stand beside her. "But there's also a chance we do win, a chance we prove that this place, this life, it's worth defending." She turned to face him, and in the lamplight her face was all angles and shadows, beautiful and fierce. "Why does this matter so much to you?" "The truth, Jonah, not the pretty version." He could have deflected, could have offered platitudes, but she deserved honesty, raw and unvarnished. "Because when Sarah and Emma died, I died with them," he said quietly. "Kept breathing, kept moving, but I was dead inside, just going through motions because stopping seemed like admitting defeat." He met her eyes. "You changed that. Not because you needed saving, because you reminded me what it feels like to give a damn about something, to fight for living instead of just surviving." Taya absorbed this silence for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were calloused, strong, warm. "I was dead too," she whispered. "In that shack, in my own way, I was already gone. You didn't just save my life, Jonah. You gave me a reason to want it." They stood like that, hands joined, while the storm gathered outside. No promises were made, no declarations spoken, but something fundamental shifted between them. Acknowledgement maybe that they were building something neither had expected, something worth the fight ahead. The first drops of rain hit the roof, gentle at first, then harder. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning of what was coming. But inside, in the lamplight, two people who'd been abandoned by the world found shelter in each other's presence. Whatever storm came next from the sky or from Dusty Ford, they'd face it together. And that Jonah thought, watching Taya's profile in the flickering light, was worth any price the world demanded. The storm passed by, morning, leaving the world scrubbed clean and gleaming. Jonah woke to the sound of Taya already moving through the kitchen, the rhythmic thunk of her knife against the cutting board, a kind of music he'd grown accustomed to. He lay there for a moment listening, letting the domestic sounds wash over him like absolution. "You planning to sleep all day?" Taya called without turning around. "It's barely dawn." "Dawn's when the work starts." She glanced over her shoulder, a half smile playing at her lips. "Or have you gotten soft since taking in charity cases?" He threw a boot at her, gently, more gesture than threat. She caught it one-handed, without even looking, tossed it back. "Show off," he muttered, pulling on his clothes. "Competence isn't showing off, it's surviving." They fell into the morning routine: coffee, breakfast, the division of labor they'd developed without ever discussing it explicitly. Jonah would handle the livestock while Taya managed the house. Then they'd meet in the middle for whatever larger projects needed both of them. It worked. It was working. But the specter of Sunday hung over everything, counting down like a clock neither could ignore. 3 days until Hale's deadline. Jonah was checking the southern fence line when he heard the horse. Single rider coming fast. He straightened, hand moving to his rifle, but relaxed slightly when he recognized the figure. Martha Chen, who ran the boarding house in Dusty Ford. She pulled up her normally composed face, tight with worry. "Jonah," she said, not dismounting. "Need to talk. Privately." He glanced back toward the house where Taya was visible through the window. "Anything you say to me, you can say in front of her." Martha's jaw set. "Fine. Have it your way." She leaned forward in her saddle. "Hale's planning something, more than just talking. He's been to see the sheriff, got papers drawn up. Claims you're harboring a hostile, says it's a territorial security matter." Jonah's blood went cold. Papers for what? Removal. By force, if necessary. Martha's eyes were hard with anger, not at him, but at the situation. Sheriff's in Hale's pocket, you know that. He'll deputize whoever Hale asks, make it all legal and proper. When Sunday, maybe before, Hale's getting the men liquored up, working them into a righteous fury, says Apache girl on white land is an insult to everyone who lost family in the raids. She paused. You know how it goes. Fear turns to hate, turns to violence real quick. The door to the house opened and Taya wheeled out onto the porch. Even at this distance, Jonah could see the tension in her shoulders. She'd heard enough. Mrs. Chen, Taya called out, voice carrying. Appreciate the warning. Martha turned her horse slightly, studying Taya, with an expression Jonah couldn't quite read. You should leave, girl. Tonight before this gets worse. I'll give you supplies, money even, but you need to go. No. Taya's voice was flat, absolute. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Taya wheeled to the edge of the porch. I understand that running means they win. Means every piece of ground I've claimed, every bit of dignity I've fought for it all, disappears. I won't do it. Martha looked at Jonah exasperated. Talk sense into her. Can't talk sense into the truth, Jonah replied. She's right. Running just delays the inevitable. Then you're both fools. But there was something like respect in Martha's voice. Brave fools, but fools all the same. She gathered her reins. Watch your backs. And Jonah, when this goes bad, and it will, my doors open, for both of you. She rode off before Jonah could respond, leaving him standing in the dust with more questions than answers. He walked back to the porch, found Taya gripping her wheels so tight, her knuckles had gone white. Legal papers, she said quietly. That's worse than I thought. Means we can't just defend the property. Means they've got the law on their side, twisted as it is. So what do we do? Jonah sank into the chair beside her, suddenly exhausted. We make them realize the cost is too high, make it so legally justified or not, they'd rather leave us alone than deal with the consequences. You mean scare them? I mean show them we're not victims. We're people willing to defend what's ours, and sometimes that's enough to make bullies think twice. Taya was quiet for a moment, staring out at the land that had become against all odds home. What if it's not enough? What if they come anyway, papers and guns and righteousness all mixed together? Then we fight, and whatever happens, happens. She turned to look at him, and there was something raw in her expression. Fear, yes, but also determination and a kind of desperate hope. I need you to promise me something. What? If it goes bad, if they're going to take me, you let them. You don't die defending someone who's already lost. Like hell. Jonah. She grabbed his hand, squeezed hard. Promise me. I've already been the reason one good man died. I won't be the reason for two. The pain in her voice when she mentioned her father hit Jonah like a physical blow. He wanted to argue, to tell her it was different, that he was making his own choices. But looking at her face, seeing the old grief mixed with new fear, he understood. She needed to know that his death wouldn't be on her conscience. I promise I won't throw my life away, he said carefully. But I won't abandon you either. We find the middle ground, whatever that looks like. It wasn't the promise she wanted, but it was the one he could give. She nodded slowly, accepting the compromise, and released his hand. They spent the rest of the day preparing in earnest. Jonah moved ammunition to strategic locations throughout the house, a box by each window, extra magazines hidden but accessible. Taya sharpened stakes and drove them into the ground at angles around the property, creating obstacles for horses, not enough to stop a determined group, but enough to slow them down, make them think. As the sun began to set, Jonah found himself on the porch again, watching the sky turn from blue to orange to deep purple. Taya rolled out to join him, 2 cups of coffee in her lap. 3 days, she said, handing him a cup. Maybe less, if Martha's right about Hale getting impatient. Are you scared? The question was simple, direct, very her. Jonah considered lying, offering brave words, but she'd see through it. Terrified, he admitted. Not of dying did enough of that when Sarah and Emma passed, scared of failing, of not being enough to protect what we've built here. What have we built exactly? Her voice was soft, genuinely curious. In 2 weeks, what is this? Jonah thought about it, turning the question over in his mind like a stone. It's a place where being broken doesn't mean being worthless, where 2 people decided that dignity matters more than safety, where he stopped, surprised by the emotion in his throat, where I remember what it feels like to care about tomorrow. Taya was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand again. This time, though, it wasn't desperation or fear. It was something else, something that felt almost like peace. I care about tomorrow too, she whispered to it. First time in years. They sat like that as darkness fell, hands joined watching the stars emerge. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust and possibility. For a moment, just a moment, Jonah let himself believe they might actually survive this, that the world might for once let them keep something good. Then he heard it, hoofbeats, multiple horses moving fast. Jonah was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. Taya wheeled backward toward the door, her own weapon, a shotgun now sawed short enough for her to manage from the chair, appearing in her lap like magic. How many? She asked, voice steady despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. 4, maybe 5. Jonah squinted into the darkness. Coming from the north. Not the town road then. No, someone who knows the back trails. The riders emerged from the darkness and Jonah's finger tightened on the trigger before he recognized the lead horse. Not Hale's men. Something else entirely. Apache. 3 riders, maybe 4 in the shadows. The lead rider was a woman older with gray threading through her long black hair. She sat her horse with the kind of easy competence that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. Behind her younger riders, all armed, all watching Jonah with expressions he couldn't read. Taya made a sound, sharp, shocked. The shotgun clattered from her lap. Mother, she breathed. The world tilted. Jonah's mind struggled to process what he was seeing, what he was hearing. Taya's mother, the people who'd abandoned her, left her to die, and now they were here on his land, armed, and Taya. The older woman's voice was rough, layered with emotion Jonah couldn't name. You live. No thanks to you. Taya's voice was pure ice colder than Jonah had ever heard it. You left me in that shack. You tied the exile cord and rode away. We thought. The woman stopped, seemed to gather herself. The dry season was killing us. We couldn't carry dead weight. I know, I was there. Taya's hands were shaking on the wheels. So why are you here now? Come to finish what you started. Make sure the burden is properly buried. No, the woman dismounted slowly, hands visible. We came to bring you home. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop, waiting for what came next. Jonah stood, frozen, rifle still raised, mind racing. Home. They wanted to take her home, away from here, away from him. Home, Taya repeated, and the word dripped with venom. I have a home, this is it. The older woman's eyes flicked to Jonah, then back to Taya. With a white man in a white man's house. That's not home, daughter. That's where someone saw me as human instead of burden. Taya cut her off. Where my legs didn't matter more than my mind, where I could build something instead of just waiting to die. She wheeled forward and Jonah moved with her, instinctive. You don't get to call me daughter, not after what you did. One of the younger riders spoke up, a man maybe 30, with scars across his face. The dry season ended. We found water game. The people survive. And we, he hesitated, we realized our mistake. Your family. You deserve to be with family. I had family, Taya said flatly. Father died protecting me. You left me to rot. That's not family. That's cowardice dressed in survival. The older woman flinched like she'd been struck. We did what we thought we had to, but we were wrong. Please, Taya, come home. We'll build you a place care for you. I don't need care, I need respect, and I have it here. Jonah finally found his voice. She's right. She stays if she wants to stay. You don't get a vote. The older woman's eyes hardened as she looked at him. You think you can give her what we cannot. You think your pity is better than our blood. It's not pity, Jonah replied quietly. It's partnership. And yeah, I think that's better than blood that abandons when things get hard. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. One of the younger riders reached for his rifle, and Jonah's finger moved to his trigger, and everything was about to go sideways when Taya's voice cut through. Stop! She wheeled between them, forcing everyone to lower their weapons or risk hitting her. All of you stop. She turned to her mother. You want me back because guilt eats at you. Because you can't live with what you did, but that's your burden, not mine. I've built a life here, a real one, and I'm not giving it up to make you feel better about your choices. Taya, no, you had your chance to be my family. You chose the tribe over me. Fine, that was your right. But you don't get to come back now and demand I forgive, demand I return. That's not how this works. The older woman's face crumpled, aging. A decade in a moment. I'm your mother. You were my mother, Taya corrected, and the past tense landed like a stone. Now you're just someone I used to know. It was brutal, final, and absolutely necessary. Jonah watched the older woman process the rejection, saw the moment she realized there was no argument that would work, no appeal that would change Taya's mind. She'd lost her daughter not to death, but to her own choices. The white man's world will destroy you, the woman said finally desperately. They'll never accept you, never see you as equal. Maybe, Taya agreed, but at least here I get to fight for that acceptance. With you, I was just waiting to be abandoned again. The older woman stood there for a long moment, shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Then slowly she nodded. If that's your choice, it is. Then I hope, her voice broke, I hope you find what you're looking for. She remounted and the other riders did the same, but before they could leave, Taya called out, Wait. The older woman turned, hope flickering across her face. Taya reached up, fingers finding the leather cord around her neck. For a moment, Jonah thought she might rip it off, throw it at them in a final gesture of rejection. Instead, she touched it gently, almost reverently. This was meant to mark me as unworthy, she said, but I've made it mean something else. A reminder that I survived despite you, that I found worth in myself when you couldn't see it. She lowered her hand. So I'm keeping it, not for you, for me. The older woman's face was wet with tears now, but she nodded. You always were the strongest of us. I just couldn't see it. No, Taya agreed. You couldn't. The riders disappeared into the darkness, and for a long time Jonah and Taya just sat there in the silence they left behind. Finally, Jonah lowered his rifle, set it aside. You okay? He asked quietly. I don't know. Taya's voice was hollow, scraped clean of emotion. I thought seeing them again would feel different, would hurt more or hurt less, or... She stopped. I don't know what I thought. Jonah moved to sit beside her on the porch steps. You were strong, stronger than I could have been. Was I, or was I just cruel? You were honest. That's different than cruel. She turned to look at him, and in the lamplight, her face was a map of conflicting emotions. They came back for me. That has to mean something. It means they realized their mistake, but it doesn't erase what they did, doesn't obligate you to forgiveness. I wanted to forgive them, she whispered. Part of me wanted to so badly, to have family again, to belong somewhere. You do belong somewhere, here, if you want. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Taya studied his face, searching for something. Is that what this is? She asked. Belonging. I think so. Best version I can manage anyway. She was quiet for a moment, then reached out and took his hand. Then I choose here. I choose that whatever comes, I choose it. Even with hail coming, even with the town against us. Especially then, she squeezed his hand, because that's what belonging means. Standing ground even when it's hard. Jonah felt something in his chest crack open, some locked room he'd kept sealed since Sarah's death. It hurt God, it hurt, but it was also relief. Permission to care again, to fight for something, to believe that tomorrow might hold more than just survival. Then we stand together, he said. Together, she echoed. They sat there until the cold drove them inside, until Jonah checked all the locks and Taya positioned herself with clear sight lines to the doors. The visit from her tribe had changed something, not weakened their resolve, but clarified it. They were choosing this life, this place, each other, actively, consciously, despite every reason not to. Morning came too soon. 2 days until Sunday now, and the weight of it pressed down like a physical thing. Jonah was checking the cattle when he heard Taya call out from the house, urgency in her voice. He ran, rifle in hand, heart pounding. He found her at the kitchen table staring at something she'd laid out. Papers, official looking with seals and signatures. Where did these come from? He demanded. Found them stuck to the door. Someone rode by in the night, left them. She looked up at him, face pale. It's an eviction notice, Jonah. Says I'm trespassing on territorial land, that I have 24 hours to vacate or face forcible removal. Jonah snatched up the papers, scanned them. Legal language, territorial seal, sheriff's signature. All proper and official, and designed to make what they were planning seem lawful. 24 hours, he said flatly, not even waiting for Sunday. They're accelerating, probably worried we'll fortify too much, or that word will spread about what they're doing. Taya's hands were steady on the table, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Smart in a cowardly way. We could fight it. Legally, I mean. Martha might know a lawyer. Jonah. She met his eyes. We both know how this works. The law is a tool, and right now Hale's holding it. We can't win in a courtroom. So what do we do? She was quiet for a moment, thinking. When she spoke, her voice was calm, calculated. We make them come for me in daylight, in front of witnesses, make them show the town exactly who they are. That's dangerous. It's all dangerous. She wheeled to the window, looked out at the ranch. But if we're going to lose, I'd rather lose fighting than hiding. And maybe if enough people see what's really happening, not everyone will go along with it. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But looking at her face, at the determination there, Jonah couldn't argue. Wouldn't argue. All right, he said. Then we invite them to the show. Make this as public as possible. They spent the morning spreading word. Jonah rode to every neighboring ranch within a few hours' ride, told them what was happening when it was happening. Most looked uncomfortable, some hostile, but a few seemed troubled by what Hale was planning. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lost a son to Apache raids, surprised him by spitting in the dust and saying, "Going after a crippled woman ain't justice. It's just mean." By the time Jonah returned to the ranch, the sun was high and hot. He found Taya on the porch, dressed in her best shirt, again hair braided with careful precision. She'd set out 2 chairs, a small table between them with a coffee pot and cups. "What's all this?" he asked. "Civilization," she replied. "When they come, they'll find us having coffee like nothing's wrong. Make them be the aggressors. Make them show their hand first." It was brilliant and infuriating, and so very her. Jonah cleaned himself up, changed into his own decent shirt, and joined her on the porch. They sat there sipping coffee, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. It arrived just after noon. Dust cloud on the horizon, resolving into a dozen riders. More than Jonah expected. Hale in the lead, sheriff beside him, and behind them a mix of townsmen and deputized thugs. They pulled up at the property line, hesitating when they saw the peaceful scene on the porch. "Pike," Hale called out, "you got the notice?" "I did," Jonah replied, not moving from his chair. Read it carefully. Legal language is tricky." 24 hours are up as of noon. She needs to leave." "Does she?" Jonah took a sip of coffee. "Because last I checked, this is my property. She's my guest. and I don't recall inviting any of you onto my land." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "This isn't a social call, Pike. We got legal authority. Territorial law says a lot of things." Jonah interrupted. "Says a man's home is his castle. Says guests are protected under the host's rights. You really want to test which law holds up better?" Hale's face was reddening. "You can't hide behind technicalities. That woman is a threat. To who?" Taya spoke up, voice clear and strong. "I'm one woman in a chair. I have no weapons. You can see no army at my back. The only threat I pose is to your comfort, to your need to see me as less than human." "This isn't about you specifically," the sheriff started. "It's entirely about me specifically." Taya cut him off. "You've wrapped it in legal language and territorial security, but at the core, this is about a group of men who can't stand the idea of an Apache woman living with dignity on land they consider theirs." She leaned forward. "So let's drop the pretense. You want me gone because I remind you that your laws are built on land that wasn't yours to take on violence you'd rather forget." The silence that followed was explosive. Several of the men shifted in their saddles, looking uncomfortable. A few looked angry, but Hale looked triumphant. "See, boys," he called out, "this is exactly what I warned you about. The Apache mentality, always claiming victimhood, always trying to make us feel guilty for building civilization." He pointed at Taya. "You're leaving, today, one way or another." "No," Taya said simply. "Then we'll remove you by force." "Try it," Jonah said, standing now, hand moving to his hip. "But understand this, every man who crosses that fence line is making a choice. A choice to be the kind of person who drags a woman from her home. A choice that'll live with you long after today." Some of the riders looked uncertain now. Good. Doubt was a weapon too. But Hale was committed too far in to back down. He started to dismount, and half the men followed his lead. They were really going to do this. Really going to hold it right there. The voice came from behind them, from the road. Everyone turned to see Martha Chen riding up, and behind her was a mixed group. Some townspeople, some ranchers, maybe a dozen in all. Not an army, but enough. Enough to make this complicated. "Martha," Hale said slowly, "this doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't. This is my town too, my territory, and I say what you're doing here is wrong." She rode right up to the fence line, positioned herself between Hale's men and the porch. "You want to remove that woman, you'll have to go through me first. And me," Mrs. Patterson spoke up, riding forward, "lost my boy to Apache, but I ain't losing my humanity too. This is wrong, Hale. You know it is." One by one, the others in Martha's group voiced their agreement. Not everyone, some stayed silent, conflicted, but enough. Enough to shift the balance. Hale looked around, saw his certainty crumbling. "This is legal. Sheriff, tell them." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Technically, if there's a dispute about the interpretation of the law, we're supposed to wait for a territorial judge. Could take weeks." "We don't have weeks." "Then maybe you should have thought this through better," Martha said coldly. "Maybe you should have realized that not everyone in Dusty Ford wants to be the kind of town that tears families apart. They're not family." Hale started, but Martha cut him off. "They're close enough, and that matters." She turned to face Jonah and Taya. "I don't know what you two have here. Don't know if it's going to last, or if it's just two broken people clinging to each other, but I know you deserve the chance to find out without a mob at your door." Tears were streaming down Taya's face now, though her expression remained fierce. Jonah felt his own throat tight with emotion. They weren't alone. Against all odds, they weren't alone. Hale sat frozen, outnumbered not in force, but in righteousness. His legal papers and deputized men meant nothing in the face of simple human decency. Slowly the fight seemed to drain out of him. "This isn't over," he said finally, voice thick with rage and humiliation. "Not by a long shot." "Maybe not," Martha agreed, "but it's over for today. So take your men and go. Come back when you've got an actual judge's order, not just your own fear dressed up as law." For a moment, It could have gone either way. Jonah's hand stayed on his gun, ready, but then Hale remounted, jerked his reins hard enough to make his horse toss its head. "Let's go," he growled to his men. They left dust rising in their wake like a retreating storm, but Martha's group stayed, forming a quiet barrier between the ranch and the road. Protection, or maybe just solidarity. Either way, it was enough. Jonah stood frozen on the porch, watching the dust settle where Hale's group had been. His heart was still hammering, adrenaline making his hands shake slightly. Beside him, Taya had gone completely still, tears drying on her cheeks, but her expression unreadable. Martha dismounted, tied her horse to the fence rail, and walked up to the porch like she owned it. The others in her group hung back, uncertain, giving space, but not leaving. "That coffee still hot?" Martha asked, gesturing to the pot on the table. Jonah blinked, the normalcy of the question jarring after the tension. Yeah, should be." "Good. Pour me a cup. We need to talk." Taya wheeled backward, making room, and Jonah found himself moving on autopilot, grabbing another cup, pouring coffee, his mind still catching up to what had just happened. Martha had stood up for them, brought others, changed the whole dynamic of what could have been a bloodbath. Martha took the cup, sipped, made a face. "Strong enough to float a horseshoe. Good." She settled into the chair Jonah had vacated, looking between him and Taya with sharp eyes. "You two got any idea what you've done?" "Stayed alive," Taya offered, voice still rough from the emotion. "Divided a town," Martha corrected. "Hale's got his faction, maybe 10 or 15 families who think like him. I've got mine, fewer but louder, and there's a whole middle group who don't know which way to lean." She took another sip. "This isn't over, it's just beginning." Jonah felt his stomach drop. "We didn't ask for this." "No, you didn't, but you got it anyway." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong. Hell, I'm here because I think it's right. But right doesn't mean easy, and it sure doesn't mean safe." "What are you saying?" Taya asked quietly. "I'm saying you need allies. Real ones, not just people who show up once." Martha gestured to the group behind her. "Some of these folks came because they believe in what I said. Others came because they're curious. A few came because they owe me favors. But if this is going to stick, if you're going to survive here, you need to give them a reason to keep coming back." "What kind of reason?" Jonah asked. Martha smiled, and it was sharp. "Make yourselves useful, indispensable. The ranch needs work, anyone can see that. Start taking in repair jobs from town. Taya, you're good with your hands from what I hear. Offer services. Make it so that boycotting you means losing something valuable." It was strategic, calculating, and absolutely brilliant. Jonah looked at Taya, saw her processing the same realization. They couldn't just exist here, they had to become woven into the fabric of the community so tightly that removing them would tear holes others would notice. "That could work," Taya said slowly. "If people are willing to do business with us. Some will be, some won't. But enough will, especially if the work's good and the prices are fair." Martha stood, draining her cup. "I'll spread the word, send some jobs your way, but you've got to deliver, understand? Can't give folks any excuse to say I was wrong about you." "We won't," Jonah promised. Martha nodded, then turned to Taya, her expression unreadable. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both." "Definitely both," Taya replied, and there was the ghost of a smile on her lips. "Good. Fools change the world." Martha headed for her horse, then paused. "Oh, and Jonah, that graze on your fence line, the one from the storm word, is Miller's been using it to move cattle through your property. Might want to look into that." She mounted and rode off, her group following. Within minutes, the ranch was quiet again, just Jonah and Taya, and the weight of what had almost happened. "We should check that fence line," Taya said finally. "Yeah." But Jonah didn't move, still processing everything. "They came for us, Martha and the others. They actually came." "Surprised, honestly. Yeah, thought we were alone in this." Taya wheeled closer, took his hand. "We're never as alone as we think." Sometimes we just have to give people a chance to show up. They rode out that afternoon, Jonah on horseback, Taya in a small cart he'd rigged to the saddle so she could come along. She'd insisted, said she needed to see the land, understand its boundaries and weak points. He'd learned not to argue when she got that tone. The fence line Martha had mentioned was in worse shape than Jonah remembered. Posts, leaning wire sagging, and clear signs of recent passage hoofprints, fresh manure, crushed grass in patterns that suggested regular use. Miller's been cutting through here at least once a week, Taya observed, studying the ground. Maybe more, using your land to avoid the toll road. Son of a bitch, Jonah muttered. No wonder he was so interested in what was happening here. Wanted me distracted. Or gone entirely. Taya wheeled along the fence line, examining each post. If Hale had succeeded, if I'd been removed, and you'd been discredited, Miller could have claimed abandoned property, expanded his range without paying a dime. The realization hit Jonah like cold water. This wasn't just about prejudice or fear. It was about land, about money, about men who saw opportunity in others' suffering. Hale might believe his own righteousness, but Miller was playing a different game. We need to fix this fence, Jonah said. Make it clear this land is claimed and defended. Agreed, but more than that. Taya turned to him, eyes sharp. We need to make Miller understand there's a cost to using us, to thinking we're weak. What are you thinking? A slow smile spread across her face, and it was almost predatory. I'm thinking we set a trap. Let him come through one more time, catch him in the act, and make sure everyone knows he's been stealing passage. It was risky, could backfire spectacularly, but looking at Taya's face, at the strategic mind working behind those eyes, Jonah found himself nodding. They'd been defensive long enough. Time to push back. They spent the next 2 days preparing, fixed most of the fence, but left one section deliberately weak bait for Miller to take. Jonah set up a hidden watching post in the rocks nearby with clear sightlines and enough cover to wait comfortably. Taya stayed at the ranch, ready to ride for witnesses if needed. The trap sprung on the third night. Jonah heard them before he saw them, a dozen cattle moving quiet, but not silent, with 2 riders guiding them through the gap. Miller and one of his hands, both looking pleased with themselves. Jonah waited until they were fully committed cattle halfway through before he stood up, rifle in hand, but pointed down. "Evening, Miller," he called out. Miller's horse shied, and the man cursed, hand going to his gun before he saw Jonah's position. "Pike, what are you doing out here watching my property? Question is, what are you doing driving cattle through my fence? This is open range. This is my deeded land, and you know it." Jonah moved down from the rocks, keeping his rifle casual but ready. "How long you been using my property as a shortcut? Weeks, months?" Miller's face was invisible in the darkness, but his voice was tight. "You can't prove nothing. Don't need to prove it to you, just need to prove it to the Territorial Land Office." Jonah gestured to the cattle. "These are branded, easy enough to track where they came from, where they're going, and the route between. Mathematics don't lie." The other rider, young, maybe 20, looked nervous. "Mr. Miller, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Davis." Miller's voice was sharp. Then to Jonah, "What do you want? An apology would be nice, but I'll settle for you telling Hale to back off, permanently. I can't control what Hale does, but you can stop encouraging him, stop feeding his fire." Jonah stepped closer. "You wanted us distracted, maybe driven off so you could claim this land, but we're not going anywhere, and now I've got leverage. So here's the deal. You leave us alone, I don't report this to the land office. Simple." Miller was silent for a long moment. "Then, and if I don't, then I make sure everyone knows, you've been stealing passage for months. Let them do the math on how much toll road fees you've avoided. Let the territorial government do the math on back taxes for commercial use of private land." Jonah smiled without humor. "Your choice." It was a bluff, mostly. Jonah didn't have hard evidence, didn't have witnesses beyond his own word, but Miller didn't know that. And in the darkness, with a rifle in play and his own guilt eating at him, the man's certainty crumbled. Fine, Miller spat. I'll talk to Hale, but Pike, this doesn't make us friends. Don't want to be your friend, just want to be left alone. Miller and Davis herded the cattle back the way they'd come, leaving Jonah alone in the darkness with his racing heart and the realization that he'd just made an enemy back down. It felt good, dangerous, but good. He rode back to find Taya waiting on the porch lamplight, painting her in gold and shadow. She took one look at his face and smiled. It worked, she said. Not a question. Yeah, Miller's going to talk to Hale, tell him to ease off. You believe him. Jonah dismounted, tied his horse. Believe he'll try. Whether Hale listens is another question. Taya wheeled forward, eyes searching his face. You're different, coming back from that. How so? More certain, like you've remembered something you forgot. Jonah thought about it. She was right. Standing up to Miller, forcing the confrontation instead of avoiding it. It had rekindled something, not violence, but the willingness to defend what mattered. He'd lost that when Sarah and Emma died, let the world push him around because he was too tired to push back. But now, I remembered what I'm fighting for, he said quietly. Not just survival, this, us, a life that means something. Taya reached out, took his hand. Come inside, I made stew. They ate together in comfortable silence, the kind that came from people who didn't need words to communicate. After Jonah found himself at the window, staring out at the darkness where Miller had been, the confrontation had gone well, but it opened new questions. If Miller had been using him, who else was? What other games were being played with his land, his life as the pieces? Stop thinking so loud, Taya said from the table. I can hear your brain from here. Just wondering what else we don't know, what other threats are hiding. We'll find out when we find out. She wheeled over to him. Can't defend against shadows. We deal with what comes when it comes. That's a hell of a way to live. It's the only way we've got. She touched his arm. Come away from the window. Nothing's coming tonight. She was right. He was borrowing trouble, seeing enemies in every shadow. Jonah let her pull him away, let himself be drawn back into the warm lamplight of the house. They played cards. She was teaching him some Apache game involving bluffing and memory, and for a while the world contracted to just the two of them and the quiet rhythm of life. Around midnight, Jonah was banking the fire when he heard it, a sound distant but distinct, hoofbeats again, multiple riders moving fast. His hand went to his rifle. Again, Taya asked, wheeling to the window. Stay back from the glass, Jonah warned, moving to the door. But when the riders came into view, they weren't attacking. They were running from something. 3 men horses, lathered and wild-eyed, and when they saw the lamplight, they veered straight for the ranch. Jonah stepped out onto the porch, rifle ready but not raised. The men pulled up hard, horses dancing. Pike, one of them called. It was Harrison from the general store. We need help. What happened? Boom. Fire. The old Morrison place up in the hills. Whole family's trapped. Wind shifted, cut off the road. Harrison's face was streaked with soot. We need every hand, every wagon. Martha sent us to ask. Jonah's mind raced. The Morrison place was 2 hours away, rough terrain. Taking the wagon would be difficult, dangerous even. But if a family was trapped, I'll come, he said. Give me 5 minutes to hitch up. Jonah, Taya's voice from the doorway stopped him. Take me. What? No, this is, you'll need every pair of hands. I can drive a wagon, help load people. And you know it. She wheeled forward. Don't make me less than I am because you're scared. She was right. Again. Damn her for always being right. Jonah looked at Harrison, who shrugged, like he wasn't about to get in the middle of this. Fine, Jonah said, but you stay in the wagon. No heroics. No heroics. She agreed, but her eyes promised nothing. They made the journey in record time, wagon bouncing over rough ground. Taya lashed to the seat to keep from being thrown. The smell of smoke reached them long before they saw the flames, acrid thick, carrying the scent of burning pine and something worse, burning homes, burning lives. The Morrison place was an inferno. The main house fully engulfed barn catching, and in the yard a knot of people huddled around what looked like a collapsed cellar entrance. Martha was there, directing efforts, her face grim. "Pike," she called when she saw them. "Thank God. We need that wagon. There's injured, and the doctor's an hour away in the other direction." Jonah jumped down, helped Taya transfer to her chair. Immediately she wheeled toward the injured, assessing with quick, competent eyes. "This one's got a broken arm," she called out. "This one's burns not too deep. Who's got clean cloth?" People stared for a moment, the Apache woman in the wheelchair taking charge. But Martha snapped them out of it. "You heard her move." What followed was chaos organized by desperation. Taya directed the medical response from her chair, her mission school training coming back in fragments. Clean the burns, stabilize the breaks, keep them warm and moving. Jonah worked with the bucket brigade trying to save the barn, but it was a losing fight. The Morrison family, 2 parents, 4 kids, grandmother, were all accounted for, all alive, but the home was gone, everything they'd built reduced to ash and ember. As dawn broke gray and smoky, the last flames died. The barn was lost, the house was lost, but the people were safe. Exhausted, covered in soot, but safe. They loaded into Jonah's wagon and 2 others heading for town where Martha had arranged temporary shelter. Jonah drove Taya beside him, 2 of the Morrison kids in the back. The youngest, maybe 6, kept crying softly. Taya reached back, took the child's hand. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're alive. Everything else can be rebuilt." "Our home's gone," the kid sobbed. "Home isn't walls and a roof. It's people, and your people are all here." Taya squeezed the small hand. "Trust me, I know about losing homes, but I also know about building new ones." The child quieted, and Jonah felt something shift in his chest. Taya had been through hell, lost, everything been abandoned by her own people. But here she was, comforting a child who'd just lost a house, offering hope from a place of deep understanding. They rolled into Dusty Ford as the sun crested the horizon, painting everything gold and red. People were already gathering, word had spread fast, and Martha was organizing shelter, food, clothes, the whole town mobilizing like a single organism. Jonah helped unload the injured, watched as the doctor rushed over to take the serious cases. Taya stayed with the kids, keeping them calm, telling them stories in a low voice, and people noticed, couldn't help but notice. Mrs. Patterson approached, her face softer than Jonah had ever seen it. "That woman of yours," she said quietly. "She's got a good heart." "She does," Jonah agreed. "I was wrong. About her, about Apache in general. My boy, he died fighting, but that don't make every Apache guilty." She looked at Taya, who was now making one of the kids laugh despite everything. "She's earned her place here. Anyone says different, they'll answer to me." It was a small thing, one woman's opinion, but it was also huge. A crack in the wall of prejudice widened by simple human decency shown in crisis. Over the next hours, more people approached with similar sentiments. Harrison, who'd ridden for help, telling everyone how Taya had organized the medical response. One of the Morrison kids telling anyone who'd listen about the lady in the chair who'd held his hand and made him feel safe. Small stories, but they spread, they multiplied, they changed the narrative. By the time Jonah and Taya left town heading back to the ranch, something fundamental had shifted. They weren't just Pike and the Apache woman anymore. They were the people who'd come when called, who'd helped save a family, who'd proven their worth in the most basic way possible. "That was something," Jonah said as they rolled down the road. "That was survival," Taya corrected. "We helped because it was right, but it also showed them we're not the enemy, that we're part of this place whether they like it or not." Calculated kindness. Is there any other kind? She looked at him, and her smile was tired but genuine. "We take our victories where we find them, Jonah. Today we found one in a burning house and a child's tears. Tomorrow, who knows?" They arrived back at the ranch to find something that stopped Jonah's heart. The fence they'd repaired, the one Miller had been using, was completely rebuilt. New posts, tight wire, a gate installed where the gap had been, and on the gate a note nailed to the wood. Jonah dismounted, pulled it free. The handwriting was rough but clear. Debt paid. We're square. M. Miller. The son of a bitch had actually followed through, actually done the work to make amends, or at least to settle accounts. It wasn't friendship, wasn't trust, but it was acknowledgement, respect in its way. What's it say? Taya asked. Jonah showed her, watched her read it twice. He's backing off, actually backing off. One enemy down, she said. How many to go? Too many, but fewer than yesterday. They spent the evening in quiet recovery, bodies aching from the night's work, minds processing everything that had happened. Jonah made a simple dinner while Taya dozed in her chair, exhaustion finally catching up. He watched her sleep, her face relaxed in a way it rarely was while awake, and felt a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. She woke as he was setting the table, blinked at him groggily. Did I fall asleep? For about an hour? Sorry, I don't usually. Don't apologize. You earned it. He poured water, set a plate in front of her. We both did. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind they'd developed over weeks of proximity and shared purpose. After Jonah cleared the dishes while Taya wheeled to the window, watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Jonah, she said quietly, come here. He moved to stand beside her, following her gaze. At first, he didn't see what had caught her attention. Then he did riders on the horizon, silhouetted against the dying light. Not moving toward them, just watching, 3 figures perfectly still. How long have they been there? He asked. Since you started cooking. Maybe before. She turned to look at him. They're not attacking, just watching. Hale's men. I don't think so. Wrong posture. She studied them. They're too relaxed, too comfortable with just observing. Jonah grabbed his rifle, checked that it was loaded. I'm going to find out. I'm coming with you. Taya. Don't. Her voice was sharp. We don't separate. Not now. That's how they win. She was right. Again, always right. Jonah hitched the horse to the small cart, and they rode out together toward the watchers. As they approached, the figures didn't move, didn't flee, just waited. They resolved into 3 Apache riders, not Taya's mother, but people Jonah didn't recognize. The center rider, a man maybe 40 with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, raised a hand in greeting. Taya, he said, in English accented but clear, we've been looking for you. Why? Taya's voice was guarded. Your mother sent us. After she visited, after you sent her away, she went to the council, told them what you said, how you live now. He paused. Some agreed with her shame, but others think you might be right, that there are different ways to be strong. Jonah's hand stayed on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. What does that mean? The rider looked at him, assessing. It means the people are divided. Some say Taya is lost to us, should be forgotten. Others say she's found a new way, one worth watching. He turned back to Taya. We're here to watch, to see if this white man's world really accepts you, or if it will break you as we feared. I don't need your approval, Taya said flatly. No, but you might need our help, and we might need to learn from what you're building. He gestured to the ranch. This is something new, Apache and white living together, building together. If it works, if it really works, it could change things, show others that there's a path beyond endless war. The implications hit Jonah like a freight train. They weren't just building a life here, they were building a symbol, a template. Success or failure, their choices rippled beyond these fence lines. No pressure, Taya said dryly, but Jonah could hear the weight in her voice. We'll watch from a distance, won't interfere unless you ask. The rider gathered his reins. But know this, you're not alone, even if it feels like it, even when the white men come with their papers and guns. There are those who stand with you, in their own way. They rode off, disappearing into the gathering dark. Jonah and Taya sat in silence for a long moment, processing. "So now we're an experiment," Jonah finally said. "We were always an experiment, we just didn't know we had an audience." Taya turned the cart back toward home. "Does it change anything? Should it?" "No," she said firmly. "We live our lives. We build what we're building. Whether people watch or ignore us, that doesn't change what matters." But Jonah could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the wheels, just a little too tight. The weight of representation was a heavy burden, one neither of them had asked for, but both had to carry now. They returned to the ranch as full darkness fell, and Jonah made sure every lamp was lit, every window a beacon. Let people watch. Let them see a home where different worlds met and made peace. Let them see what was possible. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Taya didn't sleep in the bed while Jonah took the floor. Instead, she wheeled to his bedroll, looked down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she said quietly. "Too many eyes watching, too many expectations. I need to know someone's close." Jonah understood. He helped her from the chair, settled her on the bedroll beside him, and pulled a blanket over them both. She tucked against his side, her head on his shoulder, and for a while they just breathed together. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "we face it together. Promise me." "I promise," he said, and meant it, with every fiber of his being. They slept like that, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their lives, holding fast against a world that wanted to tear them apart. Outside, the watchers watched. The enemies plotted. The town divided and reformed. But inside, in the warm lamplight, two hearts beat in tandem, building something that refused to break. Morning came with the smell of coffee, and something else, bread baking, the yeast-rich scent that had become Taya's signature. Jonah woke to find her already up, already working the chair positioned at the stove, with the precision of long practice. She'd let him sleep, hadn't woken him, despite the nightmares he knew he'd had. The blanket was tucked around him carefully, deliberately. "You should have woken me," he said, sitting up. "You needed rest. I needed to think." She didn't turn from the bread, but her voice was softer than usual. "Last night, sleeping like that, it felt right. That scares me." Jonah stood, moved, to pour himself coffee. "Why does it scare you?" "Because the moment something feels permanent, the world takes it away." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were raw with honesty. "I've lost everything I ever cared about. Father, tribe, the use of my legs. Every time I think I've found solid ground, it crumbles." He wanted to promise her it wouldn't happen again, that this was different. But promises were just words, and words couldn't stop bullets or hatred, or the 1,000 ways the world found to break people. "Then we hold on anyway," he said instead. "We hold on until our hands bleed, and then we hold on some more." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Until our hands bleed." The bread came out perfect, and they ate it with the last of the preserves. Simple food, but it tasted like hope. After breakfast, Jonah went to check the cattle and found something that made his heart stop. The new calf Chance was lying on its side, breathing labored white foam at its mouth. "Taya," he called, not taking his eyes off the calf. "Something's wrong." She wheeled out, took one look, and her face went grim. "Poison. Something it ate or drank." "How do you know?" "Mission school taught basic veterinary care. That foam, the breathing classic signs." She wheeled closer, examined the calf's gums. "We need to purge its system, now." They worked frantically, Taya directing from memory, while Jonah's hands did the heavy work. Force water mixed with charcoal down the calf's throat, stimulate vomiting, keep it moving to prevent the poison from settling. The mother cow watched with wide, frightened eyes. It took 2 hours of desperate effort before the calf finally vomited a black, vile mess that confirmed Taya's diagnosis. After the breathing eased, the foam disappeared. The calf was weak but alive. "What kind of poison?" Jonah asked, staring at the mess. Taya touched it carefully with a stick, sniffed. "Oleander, I think. Someone crushed the leaves, mixed it into something sweet, to mask the taste. This wasn't an accident, Jonah. Someone tried to kill your cattle. The rage that flooded through him was white-hot, blinding. Someone had come onto his property, into his barn, and poisoned an innocent animal. This wasn't about land disputes or prejudice anymore. This was malice, pure and simple. Who would? He started, but Taya cut him off. Hale, has to be. Miller backed off, your fence is rebuilt. But Hale, he's not the type to let go. She wheeled toward the barn. We need to check everything, every water source, every feed bag. If they did it once, they might have done it multiple times. They spent the day in tense inspection, and Taya was right. They found oleander residue in 2 other feed bags, poison scattered in 1 water trough. Someone had been thorough, methodical, trying to destroy Jonah's livelihood, 1 animal at a time. This is war, Jonah said flatly, dumping the poisoned feed. He's declared war. Then we respond. Taya's voice was ice. But smart, not with violence, with exposure. We let everyone know what he did, how far he's willing to go. Who's going to believe us? It's our word against his. Not if we have proof. She held up a crushed oleander leaf she'd found near the barn. This doesn't grow around here naturally. Nearest place it grows is Hale's property. He's got it all around his house. Remember, Martha mentioned it once. Said his wife loved the flowers despite them being deadly. It was circumstantial at best, but it was something. They rode into town that afternoon, Taya carrying the evidence in a cloth, Jonah carrying cold fury. They went straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff looked up from his desk, saw them, and his face went carefully neutral. Pike, Miss Taya, what brings you in? Attempted murder of livestock, Jonah said, setting the poisoned feed on the desk. Someone came onto my property last night, poisoned my cattle feed. The calf nearly died. The sheriff examined the evidence, his expression unreadable. That's a serious accusation. You got any idea who? Oleander poisoning, Taya said, placing the crushed leaf beside the feed. This plant doesn't grow naturally within 10 miles of our ranch, but it grows all over Hale's property. The sheriff's jaw tightened. That's circumstantial. Could have blown in from anywhere. Could have, Jonah agreed. But combined with Hale's threats, his attempt to remove Taya, his anger when we stood our ground, it paints a picture. Pictures don't hold up in court. Then investigate, Taya pressed. Search Hale's property, question his hands. If he's innocent, he's got nothing to hide. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, clearly torn. He was Hale's man, everyone knew it. But this was attempted murder, even if just of cattle. It was a line crossed, one that demanded response. I'll look into it, he finally said. But Pike, if you're wrong about this, if you're just throwing accusations because of personal grudges, there'll be consequences. I'm not wrong, Jonah said flatly. They left the office and Taya immediately wheeled toward the general store. What are you doing? Jonah asked, making sure the story spreads. Sheriff might drag his feet, but gossip moves fast. She was right. Within an hour, half the town knew about the poisoning, about the oleander, about the suspicions. People gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. Some looked skeptical, others troubled. But the seed was planted, doubt about Hale's righteousness taking root. Martha found them at the store, her face grave. Is it true about the cattle? Every word, Jonah confirmed. Damn. She looked around, lowered her voice. Hale's losing control. I've heard things. He's been drinking heavy, talking wild. Says you've made him a laughingstock, that he can't show his face without someone questioning his judgment. That's not our problem, Taya said. No, but it makes him dangerous. Cornered animals lash out, and Hale's feeling cornered. Martha touched Jonah's arm. Watch yourselves. This isn't over. They headed back to the ranch as the sun began to set, both of them tense, waiting for the next move. It came sooner than expected. They were maybe a mile from home when they heard it. The unmistakable crack of a rifle shot, followed by the whistle of a bullet passing too close. Jonah threw himself over Taya's chair, toppling them both into the dirt behind a rock outcropping. Are you hit? He demanded, running his hands over her frantically. No, I'm... Another shot, this one sparking off the rock above their heads. Someone's shooting at us. Jonah pulled his rifle, scanned the ridgeline. There, a glint of metal, maybe 200 yards out. Long range, but manageable. He returned fire, not trying to hit anything, just make the shooter think twice. "Can you move?" he asked Taya. Chairs busted. Wheel came off in the fall. She was pulling herself behind better cover, using her arms. "Leave it. We need to move." Jonah grabbed her, lifted her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, and ran. More shots followed, kicking up dust, but he was moving too fast, too erratically. They made it to a dried creek bed, dropped into cover. "How many?" Taya gasped. "One shooter, I think. Professional, or at least experienced. Those shots were measured, not panic fire." Hale wouldn't do this himself. No, he'd hire someone. Jonah checked his ammunition. "We're pinned. Can't make it to the ranch from here without crossing open ground." Taya's mind was already working. "The creek bed runs north, takes us away from home, but toward the Patterson Ranch, maybe 2 miles. Can you manage it?" She looked at him, and there was fire in her eyes, despite the fear. "I've crawled through worse. Let's move." They moved through the creek bed, Jonah supporting Taya. When the terrain got rough, both of them expecting bullets any moment, but the shooting had stopped. Either the shooter lost them or was repositioning. Neither option was comforting. It took an hour to reach the Patterson place, both of them exhausted, Taya's arms shaking from the effort. Patterson took one look at them and ushered them inside without questions. "Someone shot at us," Jonah said without preamble. "Ambush on the road from town." Mrs. Patterson's face went hard. "I'll send my boys to get your horse and wagon, and I'm sending word to Martha, to the sheriff. This has gone too far." She was as good as her word. Within 2 hours, the ranch was swarming with people. Martha, the sheriff, several townspeople who'd heard what happened. Even Miller showed up looking genuinely disturbed. The sheriff found shell casings on the ridge, confirmed professional work. "Someone hired a shooter," he said, holding up a brass casing. "This isn't local ammunition. Came from out of territory, probably Santa Fe." "Hale," Jonah said, "I need proof. Then get it." Taya's voice cracked like a whip. "Someone tried to kill us today. Not scare us, not threaten kill. And you want proof before you act." The sheriff's face reddened. "I can't just arrest a prominent citizen without—" "Watch me do it for you," Martha said, stepping forward. "I've got half the town ready to march on Hale's place. You either lead that march legally or we do it as a mob. Your choice." It was the threat that finally moved him. The sheriff gathered a group, official, deputized, legal, and rode for Hale's ranch. Jonah and Tia followed despite Mrs. Patterson's protests. This was their fight. They needed to see it through. Hale's place was a sprawling affair, bigger than Jonah's by half, with the oleander plants Taya had mentioned growing in ornamental rows. The sheriff approached the main house, knocked with more authority than Jonah had seen from him. Hale opened the door, saw the crowd, and his face went from confusion to rage. "What the hell is this?" "Official investigation," the sheriff said. "There's been an attempted murder. I need to search your property. Question your hands." "On whose authority?" "Mine. And the territorial law that says I can investigate serious crimes." The sheriff was standing straighter now, maybe finding his spine. "You can cooperate, or I can get a warrant and make this harder." Hale looked past the sheriff to Jonah and Taya. His eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard. Whatever he'd been drinking, it was a lot. "This is about them, about that Apache. This is about oleander poisoning and rifle shots." The sheriff cut him off. "Now step aside." What followed was a systematic search. They found more oleander crushed and prepared in Hale's workshop. They found receipts for ammunition that matched the shell casings. And in the bunkhouse, they found a hand who, cracked under questioning, admitted Hale had hired a man from Santa Fe, paid him to scare off the troublemakers. Scare off, not kill. But the line between the two was razor thin, and everyone knew it. The sheriff arrested Hale right there in front of God and everyone. The big man didn't resist, just stood there looking broken, like he couldn't understand how it had come to this. "I just wanted them gone," he said, almost to himself. "Just wanted things back the way they were." "Things change," Taya said quietly. "You either change with them or break against them." Hale looked at her, and for a moment there was something almost like understanding in his eyes. Then the sheriff led him away, and the crowd dispersed, and it was over. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Taya sat in a borrowed wagon, Jonah beside her, both processing what had happened. They'd won. Against all odds, against prejudice and violence and the weight of history, they'd actually won. "What happens now?" Taya asked as their ranch came into view. "Now we live," Jonah said simply. "We fix the chair, tend the cattle, keep building." Just like that. Just like that. But it wasn't quite that simple. Over the next weeks, the territory buzzed with the story. Hale was tried and convicted not of attempted murder, the evidence wasn't quite strong enough, but of poisoning livestock and conspiracy to harm. He was fined, heavily stripped of his council position, reputation in tatters. More importantly, the story of Jonah and Taya spread. The rancher and the Apache woman who'd stood their ground, who'd faced down hate and won. It became a symbol just like the watching Apache had predicted. Some people hated it, saw it as everything wrong with the changing West, but others saw a possibility. Martha's boarding house started sending regular work to the ranch. Repairs, carpentry, the kind of steady income that meant security. Mrs. Patterson commissioned a set of chairs, said Taya's low benches gave her ideas about furniture for her aging mother. Small jobs, but they added up, weaving Jonah and Taya into the community's fabric. The watching Apache came by occasionally, always keeping distance, always observing. Taya would wave and they'd nod, and that was enough. An acknowledgement that what she was building mattered, that it was being witnessed. One evening, about 2 months after Hale's arrest, Jonah found Taya on the porch watching the sunset. He'd built her a new chair better than the first, with improvements learned from watching her use it. She'd been crying, he could tell, though she'd wiped the tears away. "What's wrong?" he asked, settling beside her. "Nothing's wrong, that's the problem." She laughed, watery. "I keep waiting for the next disaster, the next threat. But it's just life. Normal, boring life." "Is that so bad?" "It's terrifying," she admitted, "because I don't know how to do this, how to just live without fighting." Jonah took her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "We'll figure it out. Same way we figured out everything else together, making mistakes, learning as we go." She turned to look at him, and in the dying light, her face was breathtaking. "I love you, you know. Don't think I've said it out loud, but I do. You're the first man who didn't hurt me, the first who saw me as whole even when I was broken." The words hit Jonah like a physical force, stealing his breath. He'd known on some level what they had, but hearing it spoken, given weight and reality, "I love you too," he said, and it felt like the truest thing he'd ever spoken. "You brought me back to life, gave me a reason to care about tomorrow." They sat like that as darkness fell. Hands joined two people who'd found each other in the ruins and built something new. The ranch stretched around them, no longer a tomb, but a home. The future was uncertain, it always would be. But for the first time in years, uncertainty felt like possibility instead of threat. Weeks turned to months. The ranch prospered in small ways, more cattle, more work, more acceptance. Jonah and Taya's relationship deepened, became something neither had words for. Not quite married, the territory's laws were complicated about mixed unions, but committed in ways that went deeper than paper. One morning, Jonah woke to find Taya already outside, and the scene that greeted him made his heart stop. She was standing, not well, not without support. She was gripping the porch rail so hard, her knuckles were white, and her legs were shaking like grass in wind, but she was upright, bearing her own weight. "Taya." He started forward, but she held up a hand. "Don't. I need to." She took a step, tiny, shuffling, but a step. Her face was contorted with effort and pain, but also fierce determination. "I've been working, exercises, building strength. I may never run, may never be what I was, but I can. Another step. I can stand. Tears were streaming down Jonah's face as he watched her. 3 steps, 4 before her legs gave out and she collapsed. He caught her, lowered them both to the porch. That was incredible, he breathed. That was 4 steps. I used to run for miles. But she was smiling through her own tears. It's a start, though. It's everything. She'd been working in secret, he learned, using the chair less when he wasn't watching, forcing her legs to remember their purpose. The mission school doctor had told her once that the damage might not be permanent, that with work, with time, some function could return. She'd carried that hope through 2 years of hell, and now, I may never be what I was, she said again, but I can be something new, something enough. You were always enough, Jonah told her. Chair or no chair, walking or wheeling, you were always enough. They held each other on the porch, the morning sun warming them, and Jonah felt complete in a way he'd never expected to feel again. Life wasn't perfect. The town still had people who muttered, who disapproved. The Apache still watched, still judged. The world was full of threats and uncertainty, but here in this moment, they had peace. They had each other. They had a home built on respect and choice, and the stubborn refusal to let the world define their worth. A year after Taya's arrival, the ranch hosted its first real gathering. Martha organized it, called it a barn raising, though there was no barn to raise. Really, it was an excuse to bring people together to celebrate what Jonah and Taya had built. People came from all over, townspeople, ranchers, even a few Apache who rode in quietly and stayed at the edges. Not Taya's mother, but others. Younger ones, curious ones, people who saw a possibility in what was happening here. The Morrison family came, their kids running wild. The house Jonah and others had helped rebuild, visible on the horizon. Mrs. Patterson brought enough food to feed an army. Miller showed up with a new calf, a gift to replace the one that had nearly died. Even the sheriff came, looking uncomfortable but present. Taya moved through the crowd on her feet now, using a cane for support, but walking. Slow, careful, but walking. People watched with something like awe. The woman who couldn't walk walking. The Apache who shouldn't be here at the center of community. Every assumption challenged, every prejudice questioned. As the sun began to set, Jonah found himself on the porch again, Taya beside him, watching their land filled with people. Laughter floated up from the yard, children's voices, the sound of fiddles tuning up for dancing. We did it, Taya said softly. Actually did it. Did what? Built a home, a real one. She leaned against him. Not just walls and roof, but community, belonging. All the things I thought I'd lost forever. Jonah wrapped his arm around her, pulled her close. We built it together, couldn't have done it alone. No, she agreed. That's the whole point, isn't it? We were never meant to do it alone. The music started and couples began to dance. Martha appeared on the porch, looked at them expectantly. Well, you two going to join or just watch? Taya looked at Jonah, question in her eyes. He stood, offered his hand. Can you? Not well, not gracefully, but yes. She took his hand, let him pull her up. Just hold me if I fall. Always. They made their way to the makeshift dance floor, and Jonah held her close as they swayed to the music. She couldn't do the steps, couldn't move the way the dance required, but it didn't matter. They moved together, finding their own rhythm, their own way. People watched, and in their faces, Jonah saw the change they'd wrought. Not everyone approved, not everyone understood, but enough did, enough to matter to make this place, this life sustainable. As the song ended, Taya looked up at him, and in her eyes was everything they'd survived, everything they'd built. You're the first man who didn't hurt me, she said, echoing those first words she'd spoken in trust. The first who saw me whole. You're the first woman who reminded me how to live, he replied. Who showed me that broken doesn't mean finished. The night deepened, stars emerging one by one, and the celebration continued. But Jonah and Taya slipped away, back to the porch, back to their quiet. The crowd could have the party. They had something better. They had home. They sat there as they had so many nights before, hands joined, watching their land settle into darkness. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called and another answered. The eternal conversation of the desert, lonely and persistent and beautiful. What happens now? Taya asked the same question she'd asked before, but with different weight. Now we keep going, keep building. Jonah squeezed her hand. Keep proving that there's more than one way to be strong, more than one way to belong. Together, always together. The future stretched before them, uncertain as any future. But they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else, with stubborn determination, with love earned through fire, with the knowledge that they'd chosen each other and kept choosing every day, every moment. The ranch breathed around them, alive with possibility. The house glowed warm behind them, full of memories and promises, and two people who'd been broken by the world sat in the darkness, holding fast to each other, building a life from courage and consent, and the revolutionary act of seeing each other as human. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The world was still hard, still full of people who hated and feared, but it was enough, more than enough. It was home. Years later, people would tell the story, the rancher who found an Apache woman left to die, who brought her home and stood against the world. Some would make it romantic, others would make it political, but those who really understood would know the truth. It was a story about two people who refused to let the world define their worth, who built something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. It was a story about dignity, about choice, about the radical act of believing that broken pieces could be made whole again. But most of all, it was a story about kindness, the last good part saved. In each other, carefully tended, fiercely protected, grown into something that changed everything. And in the end, that was enough to light the darkness, to warm the cold, to turn a ranch in the desert into a beacon of what was possible when people chose love over fear, acceptance over hatred, together over alone. The door opened behind them, golden lamplight spilling out, and Taya wheeled forward while Jonah held it wide. They stepped inside together, and the house breathed like a living thing, full of life and hope and the sweet certainty of home. The door closed softly, and the desert night settled around the ranch like a blessing. Somewhere the watchers watched. Somewhere the town gossiped. Somewhere the world turned with all its cruelty and grace. But here in this house on this land, two people had found what they'd been searching for without knowing they were searching. They'd found each other, and that was everything.